Pick your targets. You're supposed to pick your targets.
Yeah, and I haven't because I actually got distracted in the conversation yesterday.
Damn it. What was that?
Some really great stuff that you guys brought up about how MSNBC and Morning Joe were pillaring the rural... just rural America. Not even the rural right.
Not Taibbi and his class hatred. Yeah.
So now that's almost like a lower grade, politer version of the basket of deplorables, right? Which I just find you cannot take
the same thing.
You cannot take a full demographic of people as individuals or a demographic and just whitewash them.
Put them in a basket like that.
You just say, okay, here we go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
never mind. It's like all the people who feed you.
what I would really like to hit you with is we got a briefing from the Peace Support Training Center, or there's a briefing that comes out once a month or so, give or take, that the PST puts out, and it's kind of by web conference, and they pick a theme that's based largely on info ops. And so what they looked at was, and I thought it was really, really relevant to, what happened with Tucker Carlson and how he's gone off the deep end and become this complete Russian mouthpiece, but so many other figures on the American, I'll call alt-right or internet right, such the latest one I saw was Charlie Kirk, who I thought was a lot smarter than that. He had, of all people, Douglas McGregor on his show. And, McGregor spewing off these Kremlin talking points. And Kirk, obviously knows nothing about it. He's not even the least bit informed. And he's just letting the guy, letting it ride. And how so many of these other figures, on the modern right, with a few lone exceptions, like Shapiro and Kissen. Mm-hmm. And Shapiro is pretty much alone on the American scene, saying, it's not in America's interest if Russia wins this thing. And so they had the seminar.
In the new right, he's alone, but he's not. Alone. He's not alone on the old right. Like if you go
on the old right.
If you're talking like the National Review crew or the Dispatch crew, they're very
they have a bit more long-term vision on this.
Yeah,
but the briefing that we got was specifically about Russian information operations in Western media.
Interesting.
And how they form.
Now I'm intrigued.
So they had a couple of different academics, one from, I think, University of Ottawa, another fellow named Marcus Kolga from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And I'll start with his briefing. He said, we can talk about these things in 5 categories. How Russia injects their points of view into our information space. So category 1, a narrative is injected onto a single platform, somewhere in the new media landscape. And they'll start with a friendly platform. They'll start with something that is already kind of inclined to their point of view. In other words, something that is already mistrustful of the mainstream narrative, whether that's left or right. You start there and inject that in a couple of different places.
So like Telegram or something.
Yeah. And then category 2, you break out to additional platforms. And he gave 2 examples. And they'll use both left and right fringe sources. And this is the key. You use what's on the fringe because they're more open to new information and content. They don't have as many people as readers. They don't have as many contributors. So they're always interested in content. So he gave 2 examples. David Wolf was one who's a real conspiracy guy, but he's not really into politics. He's more about diet. He talks a lot about, he's into, I don't know, I think he's like some hyper-vegan, but he's very anti-vaccination, like all vaccinations, not just mRNA. All vaccinations, genetically modified food. I think so. I think so. He's processed foods, he's got some really radical out there kind of ideas. And they started planting some stuff with him. And then all of a sudden he comes out on his tweets, saying that, this is not our war. We should be having nothing to do with this. And Ukraine is actually part of Russia. And then he also gave an example with a publication called Canadian Dimension, which is a very, very progressive internet magazine that's very left-wing, and attacks on Chrystia Freeland being a Ukrainian Nazi supporter. They used that. They were able to get Canadian Dimension to buy into that line. So you start there. Category 3 is then when you break out across mediums. So your message then gets common enough on these fringe internet that it gets picked up by television or newspaper or radio.
Yeah, because they moved the Overton window a bit.
Right, and there you go.
And then even if the more mainstream people talk about it, even if they say, look what the kooks are saying.
Exactly, you're still bringing it from the fringe to the respectable source.
Right.
Category 4 is when you can get a celebrity to now endorse this narrative.
Right.
Be it a movie star, a media figure, sports figure, anybody who has name notoriety.
RFK Jr.
Or Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
Category 5, you're now able to impact policy or provoke political action. And that is the goal. That is the end state that is desired. So...
No, we're seeing that in the U.S. now. It's
Yes. Yes.
I was just thinking about this. This is probably something maybe a lot of other people have thought about a lot more clearly. It just kind of dawned on me today, I think. It's just like how many people on the American right are just reflexively against Ukraine because of the Biden's entanglement with Burisma and that stuff,
has
right?
absolutely
and it's just like,
occurred to me.
So the Bidens were entangled with Burisma, which is true.
Yep.
And as more and more evidence of this comes out, like Hunter's laptop and all that stuff comes out, it was like, okay, yes, so Hunter was selling his dad's influence.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how he's making his living, right? Okay, we know this. And he was doing it in Ukraine.
And among other places.
Among other places. Ukraine is corrupt and we shouldn't help them.
Yeah.
Right. And it's no more complicated than that.
And
but people like simplicity.
It begs the question,
absolutely,
though.
you're right.
Does the right in America set its own opinions? Or does the left set the right's opinions? If I'm just going to be reflexively against anything the Democrats go for, I'm not making up my mind. I'm letting the Democratic National Convention do it for me.
Yeah, but I mean...
it's a mindless sheep mentality that I always used to criticize the left for, and now the American right is doing it in spades. It's like, I don't have to think about the issue. This is what I'm told. I don't have to think about the issue. That's what they're
for it. I'm against it.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah,
and that's, I mean, so you raise the logic, great, right? But that and $2.50 will get you an espresso at Starbucks, right? I mean, it's just
you been to Starbucks lately? No.
Yeah,
because
$3.75.
Because they don't care. They don't care to hear that, and that's the problem on both ends of the spectrum, right? But interestingly, we're talking about the right today.
Yep.
It's just and the irony of what we're talking about is these conspiracy theorists are being fed this information by a fucking conspiracy, and they won't question that, right?
Well,
the fact that Russia is feeding disinformation to them is something they should be at least willing to consider.
Now there are factors in it. Like, kind of what you mentioned. Part of the problem is that this is coming from Russia. If this was, say, coming from, say, a conflict in Uganda, or say Nigeria had attacked, Central African Republic, I don't think it would be as easy because there's a lot of Russia fatigue in the American space. Since 2016, we've been hearing nothing but Russia, 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 Russia. And it all turned out to be a hoax.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem, in that the American left was continually beating the Russia drum in a hoax to discredit Trump. And it was kind of like crying wolf. Now that Russia actually is not a latent threat, but an active threat, we've kind of burned out the circuit because we played that too many times. I'm not blaming that 100%, but I think that is a factor.
Well, it's interesting because, okay, I'm going to admit that I've drunk the Kool-Aid that I look at
The
as
Russia Kool-Aid?
Yeah.
Like at the time.
The Russia.
Say between 2016 and 2019.
Well, I mean, there's enough indicators to still kind of go, what the hell, right? Like, you know, I don't care about the PP tapes and the steel file, the steel dossier or anything like that, right? But just, you know, just seeing the way that Trump behaved at the G7 or G9 or whatever around Putin, it's like...
I think that might be more just because Trump kind of personally likes Putin's brand. Putin not necessarily likes Putin, but likes Putin's brand.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I get that. And also, I think Putin is a very charismatic guy because look at how he had a great rapport with Obama and Bush. I remember Bush, you know, I looked into his eyes and saw this was a man of peace. You know,
well, and like after the planes hit the towers on 9/11, Putin was like the first guy to call Washington and say, "Hey,
and I think Putin is a very skilled manipulator.
Yeah,
oh, duh,
yeah." So he's very good one-on-one with telling people what they want to hear, and you know the old KGB training coming out. So yeah, I'd say there was a part of that.
I think maybe that was Trump was like the big fish coming from the little pond into the bigger pond and trying to
and he kind of got a little schmoozed. He kind of got played by guys who are more experienced in that political circle. Yeah, right. Also, part of the problem is that the consequences of Ukraine's fall are abstract.
Yeah,
they are difficult to articulate and explain in very linear terms.
Oh, I wouldn't say they're necessarily abstract, but they are broad.
Yeah, like they're hard to say. If
and it's
X
hard
happens,
to prove.
then Y will result. Yeah,
you know. But I think this goes back to the Munich comparison again, right? This is what people have been talking about for 2 years. It's if this happens, and that conversation needs to keep occurring, right? If Ukraine falls, that is a very, very bad thing.
Sure, it is. But okay, tell me exactly why.
Well, we need to use the Munich example and
what if I don't know what Munich is?
Well, you need to be able to portray that message to some effect. But again, you're right that it needs to be, you know, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And now we're talking about the anti-intellectualism, right? So anybody who's coming up with this and saying, well, history shows, 75, 80 years ago, blah, 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 blah.
And that I think is a huge part of the problem in that we actively, our education system across certainly North America, if not the entire English-speaking world, deliberately discourages critical thinking. Deliberately. It teaches a narrative. You accept the narrative. Passive acceptance. It doesn't teach how to examine things or media literacy. The other thing is, how many people do you think under the age of 40 know how to search something without a computer?
Oh, no.
If they listened to Carlson's interview with Putin, and they said, I want to look that stuff up on my own. Where would I go if I suddenly lost my internet access?
Oh, I mean,
they don't know how.
Well, yeah, okay.
They don't know how. And I'll give you an example, two things. Mass formation psychoses in Benford's Law. When we were in the height of COVID hysteria, with masking, whether you should, whether you shouldn't, it was suggested that there was mass formation psychoses at play. And people in the anti-masking community kind of jumped onto this. Instantly, across the internet, references to mass formation psychoses was scrubbed, depending on your view of how you saw how you saw that applying to COVID. And the medical establishments immediately edited or the various schools and whatnot, the public health establishments immediately edited their references to mass formation psychoses to make it COVID friendly. Another one was Benford's Law. Somebody mentioned after the 2020, I don't know if it was Zero Hedge, but I think that they broke it first. After the 2020 election, someone said, the vote tallies coming out of the 4 swing states for Biden violate Benford's Law. And it was used as an example of how, is possibly election fraud. Again, within 72 hours, there was a mass re-editing of internet references to Benford's Law. So, and now I'm not mentioning this to kind of be partisan. What I'm saying, though, is that if our reliance on information is from instantly editable sources, we are very much in a perilous situation in that what we know as truth is controlled by internet service providers.
Yeah.
And if I have the ability to use my bots to edit these sources, I can control what people know.
Well, it's not just what people are gaining in terms of knowledge, what they're receiving. Mm-hmm. It's what they want to receive. Right?
But
the
even if you have an open mind, even if you haven't made up your mind yet, and you just want to know, I can manipulate what information you can receive.
And I think this is what I brought up last time. This is my problem nowadays. Like, I've almost given up. Like, I love sitting and talking with you guys, right? Because we can have a free exchange of ideas. But aside from that, I mean, even the things you're saying, and not to discredit you, right? But so in my head, now I throw my level of distrust at what you just said about those two, mass
formation psychoses.
Formation psychoses and Benford's Law?
Benford's Law, yeah.
Benford's Law.
Yeah.
Right? So you stated some things as facts. And those facts are that people brought this up at such and such a point, and within X amount of time, someone had altered the academic definitions of those things.
Or at least the online references to them.
Right.
To fit with what the narrative they wanted to support. And I'm pretty sure we could find examples on the right or on the left as well, where right-wing sources have... those are the just two that first came to my mind, right? But if we talked about it for a few minutes, I would bet you $50 right now that within 7 minutes, we could find an example of where right-wing sources have altered online definitions of terms and concepts to benefit a right-wing narrative that had been critiqued by the left.
Well, I think
Guarantee it.
And you're right. I think I've talked so many times about how so many of these things come together. So getting back to my original point, it's like, again, it's not that I distrust you.
Right.
But I just distrust the information that's out there. So you're pointing to some stuff that in good faith, you're going, I've looked at this and seems kind of sketchy to me.
Right? No, that's not what I meant. What I meant to say is that our information sources are very manipulatable. Or they're very wide open to manipulation.
Yeah.
That, say, for example, being the outdated, obsolete fossil you are, you can go pull out a volume of Britannica and look up something. Because that printed page cannot be altered.
And I could probably
post factum.
Look up multiple versions of it from 2010 back.
Right.
Every 10 years, it will say the same thing.
Absolutely. Or it might say something different because our perception of a concept changes over time. For example, was Louis Riel a traitor? Read a source in 1910, very different from a source in 2007.
Yeah, fair enough.
But that also has a value in it because you can see how perceptions change over time with the influence of new information and new scholarship. There's a value in that. Whereas if your only way of getting information, say if I'm 22 years old and you ask me about Louis Riel, Wikipedia.
Yeah.
I have no idea how to do it any other way.
I think...
and of course, I'm at the mercy of the last guy who edited it.
Absolutely. I mean, and so again, my point, and going back a couple of minutes to something else that you said, because you talked about how it's academia that discourages critical thought. I don't think it does. I think it's, as a society, like socially, culturally, we are now, like, critical thought is anathema to us. We are not capable of it. And that's not academia's fault. That's not the school system's fault per se. It's as a culture, we have, again, I go back to my tropes are all the same. I keep going, listen, you get a medal for fucking showing up. You can't be disciplined for fuck all.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you, in that, society does that, or popular culture also contributes to that, because popular culture also discourages anything other than passive acceptance of the dominant narrative.
And so and dominant narrative is an interesting concept these days, because, again, dominant narratives are coming from the extremes, right? Now, I would say the woke currently has the advantage in that, in terms of power. And that's where academia is, to a certain extent, right? To a large extent. I will argue that up until possibly as late as 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, right? Academia was not as I perceive you portraying it, right? But now it is, right? Now, academia, we're seeing enough of it regarding Israel and Palestine and Hamas in the October 7th and ever since. It's academics who are coming out and spewing a lot of hypocrisy.
You mean particularly, say, with the Gaza war?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's an example of how academia has, I think, stopped indulging in, using critical thought itself and is discouraging it, right? But prior to that, I would say, no, that wasn't the case. It was the culture that was inflicting it. And you see that to a certain extent. There will be stories. There will be articles about such and such a thing happening on such and such a campus. And it's the administration of that campus is having to respond to the outrage on both sides back and forth regarding that issue. So, for instance, I mean, the most recent one was, that I remember, is I think it was somewhere in small town Ontario, one of the lesser places in Ontario. But for, I think, International Women's Day, there was supposed to be a speaker who was an Israeli triathlete or female. Yeah. And it was found out that she had once served as a reservist in the Israeli military, which everyone has to. And therefore, she was not suitable to speak at an event. And that's been going back and forth, right? So she was banned from it, and now the pressures come from both sides, and this institution is caught in the middle of this nonsense, right? So to me, it's not as cut and dried as that. It never has been. But these are the times we're living in, right? People are just buying into stuff, and they're hearing what they want to. They're looking for what they want to. It's being provided for them.
That's one of those things that only happens if you're not famous enough, too, right? Like, because you look at like Gal Gadot, right? Also a former Israeli reservist, right? Yeah. But also Wonder Woman,
Well,
and not banned from any International Women's Day stuff.
There was another part of this presentation was, okay, we know what's happening with our Russian info ops, and to a certain extent Chinese as well. What do we do about them? How can we counter them?
Well, I think the problem is our politics these days is so polarized, and they're not achieving anything. And the death of Brian Mulroney really brought a lot of this to mind for me recently. That politics used to be civil and bipartisan, and there wasn't just this constant attacking.
Well,
right?
Because I think there was general agreement as to the common goal.
Yeah.
The disagreement was in the methods used to achieve that goal.
Right.
I don't think there's a common goal anymore.
Well, no, actually, I think there is a common goal, but the common goals are opposite to each other, and the common goal is
How are they common if they're opposite?
Yeah.
to make the other guy look bad, and not look bad in the process. That's what
yeah.
politics in this
Okay.
country is nowadays, right? So, and I think
Yeah.
basically anytime I see the concept of Chinese election interference come up, which is a bigger thing than Russian election interference these days, right?
I would think so, yes.
Right.
A more
It's-
serious matter.
Well, it's definitely more out there. It's
Or at least
it's
for
in our
us,
faces
anyway.
more,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Every time it comes up, it's not about actually dealing with the issue and preventing it from happening again.
Right. It's to make the liberals look bad
It's
for
to make
covering it up.
Yeah, oh, this is happening. It
Yeah.
happened under your watch.
Yeah.
You suck.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm like, okay, Mr. Poiliev, could we actually focus on getting something done, or are you just here to bash the liberals?
Well,
Because
right now he's there to bash the liberals because he's opposition.
definitely there to bash
He's
liberals,
an
yeah.
opposition leader.
that isn't all
Yeah.
you do as opposition leader, right? And this is the thing that pisses me off. You talked about the common goals, right? And I think what bothers me is, again, this focus on the negative all the time. Once in a while, the other guy can do something that's acceptable,
Yes. Sure.
right? And we can acknowledge it as a good thing for our population.
Yeah. Once in a while,
And
yeah.
we don't do that. Nobody does that anymore, right? Nobody on either side. The government doesn't do it either.
Trying to
Right?
think. What would be an example of that?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything.
Yeah.
Right?
See, that's kind of hard. Like, say, provincially or federally. Like, what, say, is an achievement of the federal government that all parties could get behind and say, yeah, that's a good thing?
I don't know, like maybe bringing the two Michaels home.
I don't know about that because that was poorly done. I mean, yeah, it's good that they were brought home, but it should have been done better. Aid to Ukraine, I think all sides of the House can agree that, yeah, this is a good initiative and should be backed wholeheartedly.
And yet we're going out of our way to, someone made a stupid mistake and brought a former Ukrainian Nazi.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody is really freaked out about that.
We're still hearing about it.
Yeah, but we're hearing about it. There's a lot of critique coming to the Conservatives from the right as well on that. And that everybody should have done due diligence. Everybody should have. But like, nobody blames the speaker. Who is the speaker? Nobody's calling him a Nazi. No one's saying, oh, you're a Nazi sympathizer.
No, the speaker.
Nobody.
The speaker had to resign.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's not resigning because he's a Nazi.
Yeah.
He's resigning because he said, yeah, I didn't do my due diligence and check this guy out.
Yeah.
And the other thing is it's not like this guy actually came forward and said, oh, by the way, I was in the SS. He deliberately deceived everybody in that and tried to present himself as like a member of the OUM or some purely anti-Soviet partisan group. Not like he kept that SS past in the Galician division in the low ground. So, yeah, we are hearing about it, but nobody seriously on the mainstream, left or right, is calling Freeland an actual Nazi sympathizer. Nobody. Like, you're not going to find a single article in the Toronto Star or the National Post on that.
Okay, fair enough. Here's another example. I mean, it's when, and I know we could have multiple episodes on whether the Notley government was good in Alberta.
Okay.
Right? But I do feel that there are certain things like people just, there's this knee-jerk reaction from the right, what I call the right, to paint her as a liberal stooge, a federal stooge, an NDP stooge, right? When, if nothing else, I saw her standing up for the Alberta economy, relatively speaking, to the feds and to the NDP government in BC.
What accomplishments are you referring to there? Like, I know she gave rhetoric.
She was, well,
But
she was the one who initiated.
Did she achieve anything?
She was the one who initiated the. What was it? Was it okay? We're going to threaten to cut off supplies of oil to British Columbia.
But she never did it.
She set it in place for any government coming after her to do it, right? And it was... And
I mean, okay, it's yeah.
insofar as an attitude...
It's positive.
And the reason I'm saying this is just this.
It's not a bad thing.
Exactly. People should be able to say, she stood up for Alberta with an Albertan point of view to say...
She threatened... She made a threat she didn't carry out in support of an Alberta point of view. So, yeah, it's not a bad thing, but holy jeez, we're clearing a low bar here. Trent.
People say things, right? It's, again, you have to be able to say, okay, she stood up for Alberta, and she did a lot of that stuff towards the feds as well. She wasn't just a stooge for the feds. And, I would say, that legislation was put in place, and it's not like anyone from the Tory party has used it since then either,
it's true.
Right?
You're not going to get argument from me on that. They should have. And to be honest, I will blame the Conservatives more because I expect them to act more partisan in favor of Alberta. Mm-hmm. For Notley to do that is kind of above and beyond for a New Democrat politician, given the constitutional structure of the New Democratic Party, its relationship between the provincial and federal branch. Yeah. They are a branch of the federal NDP. So that was a much bigger leap for her, and I'll give her props on that.
I think I've said this before. That it was, I'm pretty sure it was the 80s or 90s when the provincial party actually distinguished itself from the federal party by taking out the P at the end. So it's Alberta New Democrats.
Yeah, that was a branding thing, though. Legally, they're still the NDP. And they are still bound to the federal leader of you cannot be the provincial leader, or you cannot be the leader of the Alberta New Democrats unless Jagmeet Singh signs off on it. That's still in their constitution. That's still not changed. Mm-hmm. So there's limits to what kind of schism a provincial New Democrat premier is going to do against the overall line of the membership of the NDP across the country.
No, I mean, she, like I said...
And I'll give her props because given that context, to threaten that way was a much bigger leap, like say a relatively much bigger step than say for a conservative government to do that.
To say and do the same things. And again, I'm not claiming anything huge, but that is a sign of the political times we live in, that we need to at least, every side needs to be able to at least go, okay, this person, I don't tend to like them across the board for a number of reasons, but here are some things that I can appreciate, or at least fucking acknowledge, right?
Okay. But again, I don't know if that's really something that's possible to do in this day and age.
And that's my point. It doesn't seem possible from either side, right? And I'm not saying, well, anyone's more or less guilty of it. Everybody's guilty.
Let me give you some examples that were pointed out by the professor from the University of Ottawa as counters to disinformation campaigns, specifically those coming from Russia. First of all, the Russian aim is confusion rather than a specific narrative.
Right.
They don't want to just push denazification or that Ukraine should not exist, or as Ukraine is Russian, always has been Russian. The concept of Ukraine there is no Ukrainian ethnicity. NATO's a threat. All these multiple lines are simply intended to create confusion, not necessarily a specific narrative.
Oh, absolutely. And
sorry, go ahead.
Well, because I think I brought this up last time or the time before that. I have two very good friends that I love and respect who have 1, 2, 3 variations on those points regarding Russia that they use as kind of talking points to kind of say, well, maybe Russia was provoked, or it's that Russia's not the bad guy in all this, or not as bad as we think they are, right?
Russia and China are investing heavily in AI capabilities to develop deepfake technology, the ability for automated systems to identify and target specific audiences who may be susceptible to certain influence tactics as a way to nudge or push public opinion in open societies. expect full automation of targeting cycles within the next few years. And because they're dictatorships, they're not concerned about spillover or bounce back effects within their own targeting population. The German intelligence service identified last year that 50,000 German language social media posts were traced to Russian bots. In other words, purely automated systems, basically making one post on German language social media, the three big platforms, every 2 seconds, saying in one way or another that German citizens are being neglected because of financial aid or money that's being spent to aid Ukraine. Mm-hmm. The Russians are spending as much on their means to influence Western or like international social media as they are on their actual military. It's a 1-for-1 ratio. For every ruble they're spending on fuel for a T-72, they're spending a ruble on influence ops in Africa, South America, Asia, Europe, North America.
Well, the interesting thing for me is in direct response to what you just said there is, okay, so they're going to the German people and they're saying, you're suffering as a result of money going to Ukraine.
Yeah. There's not enough money saved for medical or employment benefits because you're spending 200 million euros in Ukraine.
But this is where we come down to the critical thinking concept, the knee-jerk outrage, reaction, emotion, lack of logical thought to people. Because if I'm a German, or hell, if I'm a Canadian and we're spending money on Ukraine aid, well, yeah, something's got to give, right? The Canadian economy is going to suffer in some way as a result of us giving money to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Thanks for pointing that out, Russia. Yeah. But I'm able to figure, I'm able to grasp that for myself, right? And so it's that confusion, it's that polarization, it's that emotional reaction to stuff, right?
After Elon took over Twitter, he was on Rogan, I think, one time after that, and he was saying they started looking into bots because his first priority was like try and purge all the bot accounts, and they found once they started looking into it, they found that they went specifically the example he cited was specifically the accounts that were representing themselves as Christian right. 90% of those accounts were Russian bots.
Right. Huge, like huge just false flag on the information space.
Yes, and it's not that, and they found similar proportions on the left, and then they found that these bots were trying to organize events that would bring the conflicting sides together.
Oh, I did hear some about
in
that.
Physical space,
in each other's faces,
and then try and hope that you're going to get like a Charlottesville kind of type clash.
Yeah.
How very interesting.
Yeah, so these bots were literally trying to
It's very interesting that you bring up Musk because I want to mention that before we end this. A point that was made on this, kind of a ground floor thing. Partisans are very resistant to correction. Once someone has their mind made up, they make an emotional identification with that point of view. They're incredibly resistant to correction. The other thing that was pointed out, falsehoods cannot be regulated against. It's just not possible in an open society.
Our Prime Minister's trying, though.
And I want to cover that. Elite sources of disinformation. Again, we talk about the celebrity, the athlete, the major, like the known figure. Yeah. Elite source, like say the category 4 event. Elite sources of disinformation are difficult, if not impossible, to mute. And of course, deplatforming can attract criticism on grounds of free speech. So that's kind of our background.
Yeah, absolutely. All those things are.
So here's some tools that were suggested. To your point, media literacy and critical thinking among the general population needs to be reintroduced, rediscovered, taught once more. Civil society and media needs to be more vigilant in their fact-checking. And yes, she specifically said media. I'll let you comment on that in a bit. Investigate and expose Russian funding and connections to things like these bots or someone how like Douglas McGregor, or not so much Scott Ritter anymore, since his sex crime conviction, but say someone like McGregor, how he is funded by the Russians. This needs to be kind of brought forward to say, look, take this guy, consider where he's coming from. He's not just some U.S. Army officer, retired officer. He's, kind of on RT's payroll. We can look at shutting down or blocking known sources of disinformation. If we find out an account is coming right from Russia or is a bot account, you can get rid of it. Something that was found, some work by Cambridge University found that pre-bunking is far more effective than debunking.
Really?
And I notice we're seeing that now with releases by the Ukrainian SBU. If you know, like you monitor what the enemy is going to put forward and you get ahead of it, where you say, okay, get ready. Russia is going to start putting stuff out there to suggest that there is a schism between Zelensky and his commanders, that the Ukrainian parliament is not on the same side as the Ukrainian military, and they're arguing and they can't agree on a single coherent course of action. Be ready for that. That's coming out. They're going to try and plant those seeds of doubt. So then when you do see some random Twitter post on that, you think, oh yeah, I was warned about this.
Yeah.
So pre-bunking is much more effective than simply reacting, like plugging the hole in the information dike as you see the leak.
Like that old axiom, like the lie has gone 1,000 miles before the truth has got its shoes on.
Yeah, exactly. So, the prevention is better than the cure.
Yeah.
Now, here's some points that I think are really, really interesting. And when you look and you compare this to what we're doing on the ground here in North America, at least. Long-term strategy, educate and instill democratic values and appreciation for democratic governance within the population. And then this was a really key point that the presenter made, and I really want to see you guys go at this. Address grievances in communities targeted by subversive narratives. Your counterwork must not just be in the info space, but actual effects on the ground.
Yeah.
What's the number one criticism that the Republican Party in the United States has for aid to Ukraine? Steve.
The number one criticism is that the money going to Ukraine is taking away from money to secure the southern border.
Right. So why wouldn't... So again, in this narrative, or in this suggestion, close the border. Address that issue. And this is also happening, I guess, in France, Italy, and Spain. That their focus is about the massive influx of illegal immigration coming across the Mediterranean. And that's why they're not contributing. That's why there's not as much focus within those countries on aid to Ukraine, even though they are even at more peril than the United States by Russian activity.
Yeah.
But their information space, or not, like their public attention, is focused on the immigration crisis, which is distracting from efforts to increase aid to Ukraine. So, what do you think of that?
Interestingly, I mean, it was so. Who was the guy who got kicked out of the Republican caucus in the House of Representatives?
George Santos.
Santos. Okay, so
I thought you meant the previous speaker.
the guy he replaced, who
He got kicked out of Congress. They
Right.
booted him right out
Why?
of Congress.
What happened?
Well, because he was a lying sack of shit. And he broke a bunch of laws, and he was writing con scams. And yeah.
Wow. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
no, he was like actual criminal
He was a
conduct.
crook. Okay.
Yeah, an actual too much of a crook for them.
If you're too much of a crook for the U.S. Congress.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the guy who replaced him, and,
Yeah.
and he's being put forward as, because it's a Democrat who won. I think it's in the state of New York.
Yeah, he's New York. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And-
Yeah.
New York elected a Republican?
Yeah.
He had to be from
No,
upstate.
no.
Oh, well,
No,
he was a gay trans Republican.
Oh, okay. Okay. Fair enough.
Though I don't know if it came out that he was...
Log cabin Republican.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But,
So he's a Democrat now, and he's been put forward as the example of what to, how to message for the Democrats at large going into this year's election. And the specific example used was his constituent expressed a concern about the border.
Yep.
And he said, you got to take it by the horns and address it.
Yeah.
And that's what he did, and that's how he got elected.
Right.
Right? Same concept here, right? Deal with the fucking problem. And again, it's like this lack of bipartisanship.
But why do you think the Democrats in Congress refuse to do this?
Well, I think not knowing enough about it, but my sense is they're looking at this going, on the one hand, we shouldn't have to. So from an altruistic point of view, these are two separate issues, right? And I think there's this partisanship on both sides where the Republicans are stubbornly and maliciously going, we're going to make this about the border and try and make the Democrats look bad, and the Democrats aren't going to get what they want. And the Democrats are doing the same thing back.
And that point of view has actually been expressed on the traditional right as well, is that Republicans are refusing to deal with this issue. Because like the National Review types and the Dispatch types, they're like the Republicans in the House right now they're fucking lost their minds.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're looking at it and they're like, yeah, so the Republicans are just trying to keep this as an election issue.
But we're also seeing this now on the Democrat side, where the people in the deep blue cities on the coasts are saying, why are we trying to give $60 billion or with 18 to Israel? So what is that? $78 billion in foreign aid when we cannot afford, like when our social services are collapsing under the strain of immigration.
Well, now you're tying three things together, right?
Well, the Russian tactic is get it on both sides of the aisle.
Yep.
So they're using immigration as a wedge against Ukraine on the left and on the right. And my understanding is the only sticking point left for the House Republicans is the wait in Mexico provision. If we know that maybe it's not an existential threat for the United States, but it's a very serious threat for the United States, that does strike me as a pretty easy thing to do. Because you could change it back, for God's sakes. You could easily reverse that. You could put a sunset clause on it and say 2-3 years. Say, okay, we'll give you your wait in Mexico provision now. Approve the damn aid bill. But again, I made a lot of notes on this in that the remedies that we're talking about or that we're given, like how we can counter this information, is instill democratic values and appreciate for democratic governance. Okay, Canada, have at that. We give the Russians a lot of ammunition by saying that there's a moral equivalency between the West and Russia, that there's no good guys, there's no bad guys. When we...
Who's doing that?
The Russians.
Okay.
Their view is that, look, you're in no position to say, to talk about, say, the freedom of self-determination of peoples and all that with the way Canada has treated its indigenous peoples. And you're in no position to talk about, the Russian media, with your own Canadian state media, or they'll point out how Canada's new attempts to censor the internet. Well, how can we talk about disinformation? Well, like the Russian sources, when you say, look, disregard this source, it's a source of disinformation, it's a Russian mouthpiece. Well, they counter, well, you're a mouthpiece. You're a mouthpiece on the same side of authoritarianism. You're just a different brand.
Well, I think, again, as Canadians, we just need to look at things and be able to go, okay, yeah, we got some issues over here, right? But we ain't you. So go fuck yourself, right? Yeah, actually, I was going to raise this a little while ago, is that I just can't believe that anyone, with so much messaging coming out of Russia in the last 2+ years now, that has been so obviously, overtly, blatantly, deliberately false, right? Bald-faced lying to us, right? The fact that anyone gives credence to anything coming out of Russia, it's like, you know what? Go ahead and say what you say what you
Yeah.
want, Putin. Go ahead and say what you want,
anything
Russia.
Sergei Lavrov says
Right?
or Peskov says should automatically just be dismissed
It's like-
out of hand.
Yeah, whatever.
Hey,
Okay,
hey,
we're not
hey,
perfect.
Hey, he's just speaking his truth, man.
Yeah, just speaking his truth. You make a very subtle but effective point.
Well, that's just it.
Yeah.
The long march through the institutions has basically ensured that what you're advocating
Yeah.
for, that, hey, we're not you, so fuck you, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Because
There is no absolute truth anymore.
there's no absolute truth anymore because everybody's
Everything's
perspective.
relative. That's right.
Well, and
Oh, yeah,
everybody's
okay.
perspective is different, and I can't judge.
that's
Right?
Were we
like this
talking-
is Peterson's fundamental critique of postmodernism is what
yes.
it's done. It's taken that ability for us to say, well, we ain't you. We may have problems, but we ain't you, and we can't say that anymore.
Yeah.
Was it? I think it might have been the article that you posted, and I said I'd already read this week, and it was out of the National Post. Was that the one where there's some clown out there in academia who's writing his PhD thesis on 2 + 2 not equaling, or equaling 5? And that 2 + 2 equaling 4 is a white racist colonial
I'm familiar
Conspiracy?
with the
That wasn't the one that you'd read over.
That
yeah,
wasn't the one?
I'm familiar with the controversy, but I don't think I posted on that.
I read one recently that,
Yeah.
that said that.
Yeah.
And it was...
Baffling to you?
I'm trying to remember. Was it a National Post article?
I think it was. Let me
I think it was the one. Yeah, it was the one where I'd point out that the right is actually taking issue with the extremes on both sides. And it was the one that talked about the Coots 4 and how, and you did respond to that one. But somewhere in there, it talked about this. So there's some clown out there who's arguing that
2 +
2
2 is
+ 2 equals 5. And if you argue that the only answer is 4, then you are a white fucking racist colonial. Right? I'm like, okay, now we're insane.
Now we're in La La Land.
We've
Yeah.
officially hit insane, and that's why I found that the one that you issued yesterday, Steve, was very timely. The one that talked about again the
Class hatred?
discrediting of rural
Yeah.
America across the board.
Yeah, they're
Like they couldn't possibly have an informed, reasoned opinion about anything.
Yeah.
Right. And also the Charlie Angus thing that came out a couple of weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, about we're going to pass a law saying that anything that claims that fossil fuels are not a bad thing is disinformation,
Right.
and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
gonna be
is-
Oh,
is
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
be-
Oh,
that's going to
yeah.
be punishable by law. I'm like,
Whoa.
holy shit! So.
Pump the brakes, Charlie.
Yeah, I'm getting to the point here because
Did
I
you-
used to have a lot of respect and joy at Charlie Angus getting elected.
Did you get a chance to look at the video clip I sent about Konstantin Kisin?
No.
And his take on this? No. Where he was taking his attempt to explain why, figures like Tucker Carlson have fallen so completely for the Kremlin line. And he was basically saying that the American right, or a lot of figures on the right, are feeling more and more alienated from the political process and from the traditional mechanisms we have in society for airing grievance and getting those grievances addressed. Mm-hmm. Like he said, they feel they can no longer solve their problems through the ballot box or through the courts. And that they feel that the court system is rigged against them and that they cannot vote their way out of these problems.
That's very interesting that's the case, because I'm looking at this, I'm going, I got two thoughts about this. Right? One is that when it comes to the courts, I mean, McConnell just spent the last couple of terms absolutely going out of his way to stack the courts from the right-hand perspective.
From the
specifically
the Supreme Court?
Not just the Supreme Court, but other courts. But the Supreme Court's the big one.
Yeah.
Right? Specifically for this reason. The Republicans also took the advantage.
Whoa. You think this is a new thing? That
No.
the
It's been
Democrats haven't tried to stack the courts? Like that each party, it's like a form of gerrymandering.
And I was going to bring up
each
gerrymandering.
party does it. Like each party puts as many partisan judges into the system as they possibly can during their time in office.
Yeah.
So
from my point of view,
like, there's truly a moral equivalency there. Yeah.
So from my point of view, as the token leftist here,
Yeah. The token.
at best, they're each as guilty as the other. Right?
Sure.
So, but I'm coming at this conversation from the point of view that the right is feeling
Right.
that it's disenfranchised when really they're the ones who have had the advantage recently, and they've because it's every 10 years, I think. So it was 2020 when the state legislatures, the Republican-dominated ones, went out of their way to gerrymander everything as much as they could to help stack things for themselves, for the Republicans in the future. Now, the other answer to this, and we've had this between ourselves in Canada as well, is the way society, the majority of our society has been progressing. And progressing is a very interesting word to use here, right? Traditional right and far right issues are going to fall. Yes, if you've got those views. And in the Democratic population, that a vaster majority does not agree with you.
Which ones are you talking about?
Well, just anything. If you're talking about Tucker Carlson feeling that the courts and the ballot box are not working for them, one of the reasons could very well be that the courts,
that the populace as a whole don't
and the
back them.
populace, you are outside the norm.
What they were referring to was that you're going to get certain cases are always brought forward in New York and Washington courts because, like for example, Michael Mann's suit against Mark Stein.
This came up recently.
Brought forward.
Yeah, we talked about it last time. Yeah.
Brought forward specifically in New York because
DC, actually.
Or DC, because no matter what the facts are, Mann's going to get the decision there. Like the population there, where you're going to draw that jury from, is so partisan. You get a completely different standard of justice in those specific regions than, say, if you had that court case anywhere else. Possibly, maybe the Bay Area, San Francisco, would be in that same group. But if you were to try that case in Maine, Connecticut, anywhere else, you would not get that same result. And that's kind of what they felt. Like the indictments against Trump are largely was it Hansen was talking about them. Now he just made bullet points, so I haven't had a chance to go into them. But on his trigonometry interview, he was pointing out that no one in the history of real estate had been prosecuted the way Trump had been on one of his indictments. That this was a completely new series of law that was being used against him. He was also being...
the law is actually...
Some about his loan.
Okay, well, so...
And he said the loan was freely given by the bank.
Yeah, no.
Fully paid off.
Yeah. So the whole reason that entire case rests on the government is alleging that Trump overvalued properties to get
a loan.
Well, to get better interest rates on loans.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and at the same time underrepresented the values for insurance purposes. Or vice versa. There was underrepresentation and overrepresentation at the same time.
Yeah, no, but they were really trying to show where the damages were, was that basically he's paying an interest rate that was lower than what he should have gotten. And
taxation was being taxed. He underrepresented the value of things for taxation purposes.
But the government's run the assessments, not Trump.
Yeah,
Trump can say whatever he wants. The government can say what it wants, and the government's rule is law.
Yeah.
So basically they were trying to prosecute a crime without a victim because Trump literally had representatives from the banks the loans were taken out of to come and testify on his behalf.
Yeah. Say we gave these loans.
We agreed to the loans at the rates.
Yep.
The loans are paid off. The contracts were perfectly happy. We would do business with Mr. Trump again. Right?
Yeah. And the criticism coming out of, like, as was it Brian Lilly from Toronto saying that he's one more indictment away from the Republican nomination.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a large section of the population that sees these indictments as being purely politically driven. Like, again, how can we go after the Russians for what they did to Navalny when we are doing the same thing but at a slightly lesser intensity?
Yeah.
So
Right?
what you should do is just not prosecute him for anything.
You're right. And that was a huge tactical mistake by the Democrats.
Well, no,
Just
I was being
ignore him.
sarcastic.
Leave him
right?
alone.
Yeah. So where's the rule of law there? Does the rule of law apply to everyone, or does it not? And if you're just going
No, because nobody else in history is being targeted like that. In American, you show me anywhere in American jurisprudence where there's such a witch hunt against a particular individual. Don't tell me these indictments are politically motivated to keep him from running in 2025
Absolutely.
or 2020.
So
seriously.
Is there? So we're saying across the board, there is no validity to any of the charges.
That's not true.
No.
So and that's why it's
So-
being sarcastic, right? That's why I'm saying,
Yeah.
does it not? Does the law apply to him or not?
So the biggest threat, and the one that is kind of most, it was politically motivated, but most neutral, I guess, is the documents case that he's facing in Florida. The RICO case about election interference in Georgia is disintegrating because the prosecutor appointed her boyfriend to be the special prosecutor.
Oh, okay.
And then they, so she's paying him because she's the DA. I think DA.
Something like
she's
that,
not the
yeah.
attorney general.
Yeah.
She's DA. Yeah. So she appointed a special prosecutor, her boyfriend. She's also married. He's married. Or she was single. He's married. Anyway, one of them.
Okay, yeah.
Then, of course, out of the salary she pays him, he pays for a trip for them to go to some Caribbean destination. So
yeah.
now she's benefiting directly from the.
That's not going to help your case.
So the whole thing. So the case, the validity of the case, which he was trying under a RICO statute, which is a pretty big.
Now, what was the grounds that Trump was holding classified documents that he should have?
No,
this is
the Georgia
the
case.
Georgia case.
The Georgia case is electoral interference.
That Trump.
Well, that's the
was
phone call to Ratzenberger.
trying to rig the election.
It's the phone call to Ratzenberger, and it's all this stuff that his lawyers, like Rudy Giuliani and the crazy chick whose name I can't remember. right now,
I know what you're talking about.
All those cases they filed in Georgia courts.
Sidney
it's all-
Powell?
Release
Sidney
the
Powell.
Kraken.
Yeah. The release the Kraken, the big Four Seasons lawn care press conference debacle. Yeah, so that's all, and that's why it's tied up as a RICO case. So it's a conspiracy case.
That they were trying. What was the conspiracy that they were trying to do?
They were trying
DA.
to overturn and interfere with legitimate electoral
with the Georgia results.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's the one. That's not Florida one.
That's not the Florida one. The Florida one is the
documents.
is the documents that Trump kept classified documents he wasn't entitled to keep.
Right.
And that's the one.
And that's the one that's collapsing.
No, that one's still standing.
Okay.
But the New York
Actually, everything I've read is that the one in Georgia is not collapsing.
the case. Well, the case is kind of
everything-
falling apart because they've impugned
Right.
both the prosecutor, like the DA, and the special
So
prosecutor.
it's not fruit of the poison tree.
So it's kind of getting now. They can replace them, and the next prosecutor can choose to
Do better.
do better or just let it go. And in all likelihood, they're probably just going to let it go because it's just poisoned.
Yeah.
Right. So he might get out of that one.
That's
Well,
not what I've heard. That everything that
Like
you
the case-
mentioned,
the case-
everything you mentioned about
The case has
him being her
merit.
boyfriend and yada 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 yada.
Yeah.
That's, to my understanding, and I've read 3 or 4 articles about this. Those have been successfully and logically and legally rebutted.
No, because they're still ongoing. Because there was new data, there's new evidence that came out this week that that both the prosecutor and the special prosecutor perjured themselves in court last week. Because there's new text messages came out.
Okay, if there's perjury.
So now there's perjury issues. The case itself is has legal merit, but it's just that like Trump is lucky that the enemies that have come after him are just as bad as he
Not
is.
playing their A game.
Yeah, they're not playing. They're not. Great.
Or that they're just as crooked as he is.
They're as crooked, right?
No, they're not as crooked as him. I mean, they're
Well, Alvin.
apparently they're crooked.
They don't. Yeah, they
They're-
still
there's-
don't have to be as crooked.
Yeah.
they just
they're
have to be
They're
crooked.
going to get dinged on a technicality.
Well, yeah, but that's the problem.
Well,
If you
the New York thing, like
if you're going to go after somebody for being crooked, you need to be uncrooked.
yeah.
Otherwise, you know.
The
No one's
Alvin
buying
Bragg
your
case,
stuff.
the Alvin Bragg case in New York is blatantly politically motivated. They've won the first round, and the issue is now that Trump has to come up
Which
with.
case is this?
That's the bank, the interest rates thing, right? That's the New York case.
I thought that was done. I thought he was convicted on that.
Well, but
And then he has to
he could
pay.
appeal, but he's got to. But to come up with the appeal, he's got to come up with the money, put the money in or pay
before
the appeal.
Ongoing.
Yeah,
Right.
So he's got to cough up $400 million,
Right.
but to get the appeal to go through.
Right.
And it's like 60,000 interest every day or something like that.
He could probably crowdfund that in 2 days.
Yeah. Well, it just seems not, because he's installed his daughter into the Republican National Committee, and now he's been using.
It's his daughter-in-law.
Is it daughter-in-law? Okay.
Yeah,
You're right.
It's
Sorry.
Kushner's wife.
Yeah, Kushner.
Okay.
Oh no,
No, Kushner is his son-in-law.
Son-in-law. Right.
Sorry,
It's
Son's
so Eric's wife or
Right.
it's the other one's wife.
Yeah.
Donald Jr.'s wife?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, he's installed one of them into the Republican National Committee. He's been using campaign funds to pay legal bills.
Oh boy.
And I was listening. They were talking about this in the commentary podcast, and John Paul Hurwitz was like, it seems illegal off the hop, but when you think about it, every time they charge him, it boosts his pulse. So paying legal bills with campaign funds could legitimately be said to be a legitimate use of the campaign funds,
and this
because it's helping his campaign.
And this is kind of like Lily's point, is that they've actually helped Trump by these indictments.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now, if any of these indictments stick, are they actually going to be able to prevent him from running?
Nope. No law that says you can't be a felon.
Doing it.
There's no law that says you can't be president from jail either.
Well,
I get what you're saying, that there's a principle of if law breaking was done, then yeah, it should be punished. But there's the bigger picture where if you value everything, or if you are anti-Trump, everything you value is at stake here. Mm-hmm. And like sometimes you got to say, okay, I'm willing to lose this battle in order to win the war.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And victory as Trump goes away.
Yeah. Right. Victory as Trump goes away. And they're really working against them. They're working against themselves.
It depends on how you look at it. Now, again, polling is there's so many different sources of polling.
Yeah.
Right? But one of the this is ongoing. Yeah. I've been seeing this month by month, month over month for the last little while, where it talks about how if Trump is indicted for something, anything, then his polling gets worse than it already is. Right? So that's been an ongoing thing. The other thing I've been seeing is, yes, he's got the base. He maintains the base. And the base is, so
the base has had the Kool-Aid.
So he's winning all the primaries, yada. But he is not going to get the demographic he needs to win.
You think that Biden can win in 2024 in the general election?
That's my sense of things.
Yeah.
Right? Abortion has killed them.
Abortion has been very bad for Republicans. Yep.
Yeah.
Winning that was the most fierce.
So
victory.
That's the
right.
thing on the other way around, right? It's like
it's a lot of the commentators I respect on the right are like, look, Trump maxes out about 46% of the electorate.
Yeah.
Right. Period. That's it.
Yeah.
They don't see him getting any higher, and it's not
because he is so polarizing.
He is exactly
polarizing.
The problem is what happens if RFK Jr. Gets ballot access in all 50 states. What does he pull from Biden? Right? Because he pulls more from Biden than he does from Trump.
He does?
Yeah.
I'd have thought he would have pulled more from Trump.
He pulls some from Trump,
but I don't know a lot about. All I know is that RFK is like the most undemocrat Democrat I've ever seen in my life.
Well, he's running as an independent.
Yeah, he is running.
Yeah, well, but he was in the Democrats, and they said, "Okay, no, you're gone. Get out of here."
Yeah. Because he wasn't. He wasn't
Democrat.
He wasn't keeping up with the narrative either, right?
He wasn't very. He was not blue. He was he was the purplest Democrat I've ever seen.
He's definitely not a deep woke Democrat, but he's a big government Democrat.
Okay, true. Yeah. I get. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but what really exiled him from the Democrats was his stance on COVID.
Yeah, because the Democrats were all in with the government narrative, and he was dead
not.
set against
He
it.
was dead set against it.
Yeah.
So okay, that's the only way he really separates himself from the Democrats was
Mostly,
on COVID.
he's a pretty much a big government authoritarian. You know, he advocated when he was a lawyer. He advocated pretty vociferously for locking up people who disagreed with him on the climate narrative.
So are there any major aside from say maybe COVID? Would there be any major policy differences between him and say Obama?
He was,
and I ask this genuinely because I know nothing.
He's not as politically correct, right? So I think he would probably be more to the favor of Republicans, like in the immigration question. He's like in favor, I think, of doing something concrete on the border.
Yeah.
Very
So
quickly.
what are the numbers of? I assume it's not going to be Democrats. He pulls away from Biden. It's going to be independents.
Well, the independents are at
probably.
play. Independents are
Independents are always what decide the election. Yeah.
But
So what are the
independents is also
numbers?
the biggest group in the U.S. electorate now.
Yeah. So what percentage the independents?
Well, like okay, so say Trump gets 48% right across the border, right?
Yep.
And so then now all RFK has got to do is pull like 5 or 6 points off Biden,
And
right?
that'll do it. Yeah.
Right, and then there's what's his face?
My question is, how is Trump getting 46%? How is Trump getting 46%?
Massive. There is a
If we've got Democrats, independents, and Republicans,
Trump is huge in flyover country, right? Like
there is a fantastic series or you get it all in one video, of a very serious academic work by Victor James Hansen called The Case for Trump.
Victor Davis Hansen.
Or sorry, what did I call him? Victor James?
Yeah.
Yeah, Victor Davis, sorry. And he really seriously lays that out. Yeah. And I wish every Trump hater would either read his book or access his speaking tours on that.
Yeah.
Because again, like I hear this over and over and over again. How can someone possibly in good conscience vote for Trump?
Victor Davis Hansen was the best explainer of the Trump phenomenon.
100%.
Yeah, but how much of it is beyond? We live in a celebrity.
A great deal.
Well, remember
deal.
We just started off with talking about the Taibbi article where everybody in flyover country is now a threat to democracy.
Yep.
Right. And so Trump got the biggest in his re-election campaign in 2020. He got the most minority votes of any Republican candidate ever, right? And all he didn't even necessarily pander to them. He just went and asked for them to vote for him.
Yeah.
Right?
And also language that Trump uses.
Yeah.
Trump has deliberately, and I think I mentioned this in one of my emails, that Trump is nothing if not canny. Mm-hmm. He's got a cunning to him.
Yes.
And he has understood better than any other conservative global leader I know of. He has understood that the progressive project has failed the working classes. And he has identified his brand as representing the working class, like the blue-collar entity.
Oh, absolutely.
The rural vote, the semi-rural vote, the factory worker, and of course, globalization in the United States has greatly penalized. And again, this is not a recent phenomenon. This has been building for the last 20 years. Like as Michael Malice says, Trump was not the dam, Trump's the river. Yeah. Or sorry, I got the other way out. Trump's not the river, Trump was the dam. He was the guy who capitalized on that energy that was already flowing. That there were these social economic forces that have been building up a sense of hopelessness and alienation and frustration that the power base of the Democratic Party, which was those highly educated and informational economy type professions, they didn't suffer the same effects of globalization. So they were not, it wasn't as visible and apparent to them. They did not suffer as badly in the financial meltdown of 2008. There's a geographic splitting as the housing, the deployment of real estate has caused kind of a segregation where people in these upper incomes tend to live amongst other people of upper incomes. So we tend to form social bubbles. Social media is a factor of it. We have siloed ourselves. We have a work that, who's the guy who did the bell curve? His other
Charles
book,
Murray?
Charles Murray. This is, and again, Coming Apart is like 20 years old now. But in his book, Coming Apart, he forecasts this. Like, what's more than 20 years? It could be 25 years
Yeah,
now.
probably, yeah.
He forecasts this, that there is a split coming within societies between not necessarily white and blue collar, but say information administrative workers who are tapped into a global marketplace versus what Hansen calls the muscular economy that works with its hands, tradespeople, manufacturing, mining, resource extraction, that is now having to compete with labor in unregulated economies such as Asia, Africa, Latin America, a variety of factors coming together, and they are seeing not even a recognition of their difficulties from the traditional Republican Party. And then some disruptor and outsider like Trump comes in speaking like he deliberately cultivates that Brooklyn accent. That's just one of the things he uses. And as Hansen points out, there's very specific language. Like we use the term dog whistle. Think of a positive dog whistle. Things that, say, maybe Democrats won't recognize in speech because they come from primarily a different socioeconomic class or a different geographic strata or a geographic area, that people who live in Queens, people who live in Alabama, people who live in Texas will subliminally trigger on and say, yeah, that guy is me. That guy is the kind of person who is in my social circles, who identifies with my struggles, who understands where I'm coming from. So it's much more than, and of course, the traditional reflex, anger and hurt and frustration that these guys are all a bunch of racists and deplorables. Only things said in the heat of emotion and frustration only widen that gap.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing a further devolution, a further decay of this, where there's such a large portion of Trump voters who do so specifically as a way to give the finger to the people that they perceive hate them. Or like, who wrote this book? The guys that Taibbi was criticizing.
Oh,
That what that group represents, voting for Trump is a way, it's a burn it all down mentality that says you hate me and you hate who I am, you despise me and you enjoy, you think I deserve my suffering. Therefore, I'm deliberately doing this. I know it's probably the wrong thing in the long term. But I'm doing this because I'm screwed anyway. In the long term, I lose, whether I vote for Trump or I don't. But if I vote for Trump, I can take you with me. So there's a lot, like I'm not saying that, don't overestimate the importance of that. That's just my own little tag on at the end. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. Take a look at the case for Trump. It really lays out in very intelligent and very, how would you say, superb terms what the attraction is for so many people in Trump.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's funny because one of the questions that occurred to me as you were describing this, but you answered it along the way, was, how is globalization? You'd think of that as a traditionally conservative thing,
and
then you answered that by saying the working classes, the blue collars, the manufacturing sector, the factory workers feel abandoned by the traditional Republican Party.
Well, no, they feel abandoned by the Democratic Party, which is why they're Republicans now.
Yeah, but both.
Right.
That's why they have never supported like the Mitch
Yeah.
McConnell wing of the Republican Party.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're voting for the disruptor. They're not voting for W's successor. Or
Exactly.
whatever, right?
Yeah. They're not voting for your traditional Republican.
No.
They don't identify with the Republican Party at all. They identify with the disruptor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we started seeing that around the same time. With Brexit, we saw the same thing too, right? So we're starting to see that in other places.
Yeah. They weren't voting for the Tories.
No.
They were voting for Brexit.
Well, even the Tories will remain anyway. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right? So. Yeah, no, they were voting to get out and disrupt the whole thing.
Yeah,
They thought they were getting shafted by
Yeah, there was no loyalty whatsoever to the Tory party.
No.
Or even to the concept of Brexit. I think from what I remember reading a whole bunch of, reading and seeing a whole bunch of clips that were these mostly young people going, what did I just vote yes to? Right?
Well, the young were
and they were kind of like
overwhelmingly in favor of Remain.
but
demographic.
there were a lot of people who had voted for Brexit, and and some of them did it just as a joke because they didn't think it was going to pass.
They didn't think it was going to win.
And they woke up the next day and they're like, "Holy fuck, what have I done?"
Kinda like-
some people were like,
Kind of like the Alberta NDP. Like, people voted for the NDP, never thinking they were going to actually win.
Yeah.
"Yeah, I didn't hear that," but
Did you hear that? I heard that a lot.
Really?
They called it the accidental NDP government.
I think either way, that was a good thing.
So far as I know, Brexit would pass with a bigger majority if it was held again today. That now that it's actually happened and the sky didn't fall and that the UK is actually doing okay, that there's not the same strength.
Are they doing
for
okay?
Remain. Yeah.
Again, I don't know who to believe or
It's all relative,
regarding
but
what.
Compared to the rest of Europe. Compared to Germany.
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, the sky didn't fall.
yeah, the sky didn't
They
fall.
had issues. They worked it out, you know?
Yeah, it's not perfect, but
Yeah.
they're still better than most of Europe. So
Yeah.
Is the NHS better off?
Can the NHS be fixed?
Just, yeah.
Well, wasn't that the whole point? It was all
No,
it
I
was
think
so
it
much
was
money.
more about
that was the
the
big
general-
billboard on the side of the
general
buses
economy,
was
period.
about the NHS, and that was what the Tories used to justify it, or the Brexiteers used to justify it. We're paying so much that it had something to do with the NHS. and it was-
Nobody's happy with the NHS. Not on the left, not on the right. Same here in Canada.
The implication
Nobody
was
is happy with
was that the NHS was going to come out of Brexit looking a whole lot better.
I don't recall that, but I do recall a lot of frustration with the regulation of the economy
Yeah, by Brussels.
by Brussels that England could not change.
Yeah.
That it was done, that was imposed upon the British people with absolutely no say and no, they could not vote their way out of that problem. Like the will, their electoral will as a people was impotent. That they could not, even if the people of Britain wanted or did not want something, they did not have the power to do it. Their decisions were imposed on them from outside. And that was the big issue, which would affect everything, be it the NHS, be it immigration, be it taxation, be it transportation, any number of things. To say, okay, maybe the NHS is still a house fire, or still a dumpster fire, but at least we now have the power ourselves to do something about it without interference from Brussels. So take that. But as for healthcare, you can't fix it. And I think that's going to become clearer as time goes on, that none of these systems can be fixed. They are what they are. They're just going to run until they collapse and suck it up.
Yeah.
The political will does not exist. Well, that's it. That's a separate.
Podcast.
Yeah, separate podcast altogether. But again, it goes back to what I thought was such an interesting point, is that we struggle to counter Russian disinformation by the refusal of our establishments to address, if Russia can distract from what we should do by continually pointing out problems, real problems, our refusal to address those problems because it upsets our preferred narrative, plays right into their hands. And this really, really is going to bite us in the ass.
I mean, to that point, I think we've butted heads on that discourse as recently as last episode or the episode before that, which, like when we were comparing, I go on about the trucker convoy in Ottawa, and you go on about the violence of the First Nations protests in northern BC. And, if we're going to enforce laws on one,
Right? Why the
and
differential
not on
standard
the other,
of enforcement?
right?
Or the wet sweat.
The wet sweat is
process.
what you were
Yeah.
talking about, right?
Yeah.
So
But like,
I think
coast to coast.
one thing you and I agree on is that, or my counterpoint to the whole thing is, we have a reckoning with our First Nations. We've had it for a long time, and ironically, it was Trudeau the Younger who brought it to the necessary crisis, point of crisis, by declaring that he was going to fix our relationship with the First
Right.
Nations, and then did fuck all with it.
I mean, I don't blame him for that. It's how do you fix that?
No, but I mean, that reckoning has been coming, and it's been manifesting itself.
Well,
right?
I have heard
but we
this.
do need to fix it.
Yeah.
To your point
Yeah.
that you just made, that if Russia is pointing this out, and we don't like what we're hearing,
Like
We should go and fix
have
it.
heard this on Canadian alt-right media. Much to my chagrin, I have heard this. That how can we say we're going to defend democracy and freedom in Ukraine when democracy and freedom is at peril here in Canada? And that, to me, I look at that and I say, yeah, that's Russian disinformation right there. And unfortunately, the media sources that I think are really important because they are breaking the information monopoly of Canadian state media, are falling for it, hook, line, and sinker, and it's
I think
really upsetting.
Well, again,
to me personally,
we need to be able to separate things. And I'm reminded that, to me, it's the line from Ghostbusters, like, you do your job, pencil neck, let me do mine, right? Russia can be Russia. We can be us, right? And taking this, if the alt-right is playing that idealistic, we can't talk democracy because we're not democratic. I mean, they're as guilty as the woke.
it's so short-sighted.
Well, the woke are doing
so
the same
short-sighted.
thing, right? We're seeing that on both sides. Let's have this ideal, but let's not look at the pragmatics of it, right?
The good thing, though, is I believe Ukraine can survive even without American aid.
If the rest of Europe steps up.
I don't even think the rest of Europe needs to step up.
I don't see that happening. They're already starting to lose.
Oh man, did you see the latest headlines out of Germany today?
No.
Oh my God. Okay, so there was a bunch of Luftwaffe generals having
Okay,
a
I've heard something
conference
about this,
call
but I haven't heard the details of
about
it.
how would they, if they had to, or if they were given the order to deploy or to give Taurus missiles to the Ukrainians, how are we going to do it? What's the logistical planning for it? And that's all it was. But it's being portrayed by the Russians. The Russians hacked it and somehow got copies of it. I don't know if they hacked it, but somehow they have a recording of it. And they're spinning it as saying this is an admission of NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. Now, this plays really well for the Russian domestic audience because they've been trying to portray this as a war against NATO right from the get-go. But this is also a great way to exploit fear within, I don't know if it's the left or the right, but there's a definite community in Europe that's afraid of escalation. And they're almost willing to say, you know what, let Ukraine fall. It's an appeasement. It's an appeasement movement. They're saying let Ukraine fall because we don't want to escalate this thing, and it's only them dying, so not us. So that's okay. They're definitely trying to frighten the appeasement community within Europe. And my God, again, what dirt does Putin have on Scholz? Seriously, like. again, we are.
You're asking this, but you don't think he has anything on Trump?
I don't know.
Going back to earlier.
I don't know. I mean, like blackmail.
Yeah, I know.
Like Trump, I think he's just plain old suckered. Just that Schultz will deliberate, like he delays and he stalls. The German parliament has voted repeatedly for aid to Ukraine. His coalition partners want aid to Ukraine. It polls very well in Germany. There is like 60% and up, like of the electorate wants to aid Ukraine. Okay, so this is not controversial. Yet Schultz keeps finding ways to stall, and like they'll say, "Okay, yeah, we'll send a bunch of artillery," and then his executive finds a way to delay and stall, make it months late, or find some technicality, like the latest one with the Taurus missiles, saying, "Oh well, we can't give them because that would require German troops to be on the ground to train them, and I can't do that." And it was specifically mentioned by the German commander who was chairing the meeting, saying, "Okay, we do not have to." The chancellor has made it clear there will be no German personnel on the ground in Ukraine, but that's okay. We don't need that. And also, they've provided Taurus missiles to South Korea and Spain, and there were no German troops on the ground in South Korea and Spain handing over, in training and handing over these missiles. But Scholz keeps finding ways not to give aid to Ukraine, and it's at his peril.
I wonder if that's why, because Macron this week was talking about like actual deployments of French troops to Ukraine.
Yes.
Well, he was
Yes.
talking theoretically, and there's been a lot of discussion about
Well, but I'm
whether
wondering
or
if he's just
not.
trying to
But
kick
in
Schultz in the
non-combat
ass.
roles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wonder if he's just
Non-combat
trying to kick Schultz in the ass.
I think
But
so.
I was
and
actually
Britain
gonna-
and France have also said, give us the missiles, we'll train.
Yeah.
That way Germans have nothing to do with it. But Scholz keeps finding ways not to support Ukraine. And I'm really wondering, what I mean is when Trump does this, it's not at Trump's peril. His base seems to be okay with this.
Yeah.
It is at Scholz's peril. Twice now, it has almost brought down his government, where his coalition partners have said, if you do not action this, we're gonna walk away from the coalition. We're gonna dissolve parliament. We're going to the polls. Twice now, that's almost happened. He's facing revolts within his own party. I don't understand why he is sacrificing his own, and it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Why he has sacrificed his own political future for the sake of the Kremlin. Like, I don't get it.
understand. Yeah.
Well, the curious thing I find is that coming out of that meeting in Paris, what I read was that Scholz actually said to Macron, keep your mouth shut. We're actually sending stuff to Ukraine and you're not. Or we're sending it quicker to Ukraine than you are. Which I find
pledged
interesting.
more. They haven't actually delivered, but they've pledged more.
I'm pretty sure, I pay particular attention to the wording of it because he seemed to be implying that they
he's
had actually
sending more.
had actually sent shit that
The
then
French
France
have
hadn't.
not sent much of anything at all.
Did they send a bunch of AMX or
They've sent a few
APCs
vehicles.
or-
Yeah, they sent
Yeah.
a few vehicles and scout missiles. But say, for example, all the Gepards, the Martyrs, the Leopard tanks, Germany actually has sent, and huge amounts of 155 millimeter ammunition. Like that Germany actually has sent. But but they
It's delayed a lot.
Yeah, just that, they delayed them.
They've delayed. I know.
Delayed
and it
all
was
of those vehicles.
getting them to send Leopards, getting them
Yeah.
to send anything but like tactical and bulletproof vests,
Right.
and med
Yeah.
kits.
Whereas the French just haven't ponied up much of anything at all. But again, their domestic audience
they're all
is
about the-
much more focused on their southern coast, right? Just like the American domestic audience is focused on their southern border.
I'm wondering if Scholz is, because you talked about that maybe he's damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. Maybe in three ways, because maybe Putin's got something on him,
Maybe.
right?
Yeah.
Maybe his coalition partners are going to walk out if he doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Right? But maybe the demographic of appeasement is his base.
Maybe.
So-
Or maybe he's counting on it.
So, yeah. So
Maybe he thinks when push comes to shove,
he's like, go ahead,
Yep.
walk out of government.
Yep.
But if the appeasement crowd are
Yep.
going to be the difference for me, I
And
need
there's
to do
a
it this
third
way.
possibility that maybe he genuinely believes that escalating this conflict is a mortal peril to Germany, and that the lesser of two evils is to let Ukraine fall. Like, preferably not, but if it happens, it happens.
Yeah, but
Maybe he genuinely believes that.
you can't say that out loud.
But no, he can't.
As part of the EU or NATO.
Well,
That's right.
I mean,
But
I
maybe
firmly
he
believe
believes
that. I firmly believe that if you don't spend, a couple $100 billion this year, you're going to be spending
more,
trillions.
Yeah, in the years to come.
Next year, right? Yeah.
On that point, I was looking at this and saying, you know what? I think the frontline states all by themselves could prop up Ukraine because they've got skin in the game.
Yeah.
Like the Baltics, they will pay any price because they know they would rather spend $200 billion now than say $200 trillion, down the road, right?
Yep.
Same thing with Poland.
Yep.
Same thing with the Czechs. Same thing with the Romanians. Just they themselves, because they feel they are the ones who can feel the heat, are going to continue to prop up Ukraine, even though the Germans and the French and the Italians and the Austrians can maybe afford to look the other way. So then I started thinking about this. What happens if Russia gets a border with Poland? What if Ukraine completely falls and Russia absorbs Belarus and Ukraine into the Union state, as was the original goals of the war? And now Russia has this massive border with Poland, and they start saying, you're going to give us concessions for the Suwalki Gap. You're going to cede territory so that we have a contiguous land bridge to Kaliningrad, and start moving divisions up to the border.
It's now it's the 1930s all over again.
And now it's an Article 5 thing.
Except Poland is more than capable of defending itself.
Yep.
And Poland, the way the Poles look at this is inevitable.
Yeah.
War between us and Russia is inevitable. Let's get it over with now. NATO, I don't care whether you participate or not. We're doing this. If you're Germany, Italy, and France, is that not a massive existential problem for you?
Is it?
Huge. Think of how that
is
is going
Poland stands up to Russia, and
Yep.
now you're implicated by Article 5.
Even forget Article 5. Let's say NATO exiles Poland. Let's say the Western European states.
So your question
leave
is like
NATO.
the Poles and the Russians have a go and the Poles win.
Or
Now Poland is the big.
I don't know if they'll win. I'm not going to project that.
Okay.
But I do know that it will be a massive, like what happens to the Baltic Sea?
Right.
If there is now open war between Russia, Poland, and let's say the Baltic states on the one side. And that probably is going to drag in Finland.
Yeah.
So Finland, the Baltic states, and Poland are now in armed conflict with Russia. What happens to international air travel? What happens to shipping all across the northern European ports, of all of Germany's ports?
Yeah.
This is economic collapse for Europe.
Well, and then it probably drags because the Swedes have the biggest navy in the Baltic Sea, I think.
If not, it's certainly formidable. Certainly formidable.
Yeah, no, I think
But again, all the Swedish maritime trade is now closed.
Yeah.
The Baltic Sea is now closed if there is open conflict between Poland and Russia.
Yeah.
This is a massive, this is economic collapse for Europe. This is like, they're done. They're absolutely done. So even, I think the preference of the Europeans has always been to, look the other way. The Americans will actually foot the bill. Just like Canada does, right? Like, let's just, we don't have to actually do anything. The Americans will always bail us out. Well, if, let's say Trump pulls U.S. out of NATO, say, nah, I don't care. Mm-hmm. And let's say Western Europe says, well, I don't want anything to do with it then. And they pull out of NATO. And Poland says, fine, we'll go it alone. And the hostilities actually look like they're going to start. Just Europe knows they will not survive if that happens. So they need to prevent Poland from getting a border with a union state.
Okay, well, let's go back a few minutes because I asked the question. You said you can see Ukraine without U.S. aid.
Yes.
Just holding on.
Yep.
And I said, well, as long as Europe ponies up. And you said even without Europe.
Even without Western Europe. Eastern Europe by itself could do it. Yeah, not all of Europe. Just the frontline states themselves, I think.
Ukraine.
I think can keep going Ukraine.
So they're going to keep propping up Ukraine on their
Yep.
own?
I think, yeah, like say the Baltic states, Poland, so I'll lump the three Balts together.
Yeah.
Finland, Poland, the Czech Republic, Romania.
So they're going to keep propping up
Just those five.
Ukraine on their own.
Probably throw the Croats into there as well. Because again, a resurgent Russia is a resurgent Serbia. And the Croats don't want that either. So I'll throw the Croats into there. Just those.
But how do those economies support a Ukrainian war on their own?
Because their economies are still big enough to do it. Even if they all contributed just, say, 2% of their GDP to their own defense, and then a further 2% to Ukraine, and just Ukraine. So a total of 4% of national GDP. That would be more than enough. I mean, it would absolutely be enough to indefinitely keep Ukraine fighting. Basically, what it would be is that it would be until like the Ukrainian nation is extinguished as a people. And with 40 million people, that's going to take a lot longer than what the Russians can last. Yeah. Like in terms of equipment. Royal United Services Institute, which is the best numbers I've seen so far, estimates that Russia has about 2.5 to 3 years left of equipment. Their ability to manufacture tanks is not fast enough. They still must rely on pulling old stocks out and modernizing, and then repairing damaged tanks. Between those three sources, they can continue at current consumption rates for about another 2.5 to 3 years. The other thing is their ability to manufacture artillery. North Korea is running at what? Oh man, I wish I gave you. I should have brought down the numbers from the last briefing. They're going through about 10,000 rounds per day, which is the same rate that they were doing in the summer of 2022 when they were advancing steadily, like grinding out, say, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. They were going through about 10,000 rounds per day. Their numbers dropped down to about 3,000 per day in the lead up to the Ukrainian counteroffensive of 2023, when the Ukrainians were up to 7,000 per day when they were flush with Western artillery systems and ammunition. Mm-hmm. Now, the Ukrainians were able to do more damage with 7,000 a day because it was a question of quality over quantity. They didn't need as many rounds to take out the Russian targets, and they were steadily winning the counter-battery war because their Western counter-battery radars were better. Their systems were faster, more mobile, like they could shoot faster, tear down and move faster, set up faster, put rounds on target faster, and the rounds hit the target much better than the Russian 152 and 122 millimeter systems. So then the Russians went down to 3,000 a day, not so much because they were running out, but because
they couldn't fire them.
They were just losing them. Yeah. The Ukrainians were eliminating them faster than what they could do. And the Russians had to pull further back and this sort of thing. But now that Ukrainian support, ammunition shortages have become critical, they're down to less than like 2,000 a day. And Russian was starting to run out. Last autumn, North Korea kicked in about like a couple million rounds to prop them up over the winter. And now Russia's retooling. So they estimate that they're going to exhaust North Korea's supplies of ammunition by April, but by April, they will have tooled up enough on their own that they will be independently able to manufacture enough of their own ammunition to support their needs. But again, if the Ukrainians get enough ammunition, it doesn't matter what the Russians produce because they can eliminate the Russian artillery before it gets a chance to fire that ammunition.
Now we're talking Czechs, Hungarians.
Yep.
Finns, Balts,
maybe not the
Poles.
Hungarians. Maybe not the Hungarians, but definitely
Oh,
Czechs.
sorry, Romanians.
Czechs, like the guys who are going to be on the border with Russia.
Yeah.
Yep.
Probably throw in the Moldovans in there too. Although the Moldovans don't really have a lot of economy to do anything. But again, if all of these frontline states just by themselves contribute 2% of their economy, they are big enough in totality that they can more than provide, or they can provide enough material equipment that Ukraine can resist Russia indefinitely, in my view. Like that's not, that's not Institute for the Study of War talking. That's Paddy talking. But even then, there's a multiplier effect in that, because if it looks like it's not going to happen, then Austria and Germany and Denmark and Sweden and Norway look at this and say, we cannot afford to have a further conflict. If Russia has a border, like if the current Ukrainian and Belarusian frontiers with Poland are in Russian hands, a war is inevitable. The tensions on that frontier are going to be so high, it will be inevitable, because both sides are spoiling for a fight. And that would be the death of Europe. So if it even looks, if the Russians cross the Dnieper, then I think, Europe is going to say, look, we can't afford to wait for the United States. Like, we can't afford to keep hoping against hope that America is going to bail us out. And like maybe France and Italy and Spain never will contribute, because they're far enough removed that they'll figure that they won't care. But Germany absolutely will. They'll get rid of Schultz if they have to. Denmark will. Norway will. Sweden will. Because these guys know that their own destruction is imminent.
Interested to see how it goes.
Yep. Definitely will be.
And on that cheery note, I think it's time to call her quits.
Alrighty.
Thanks, everybody.